So this all makes me realize I'm a very lucky kid. I have a terrific, supporting, and loving family. I've had great teachers, I've had great opportunities. Last summer I had an internship at K&L Gates. I have a job this summer, and I get to go to college in the fall. Maybe you know a kid like me. Maybe you have a kid like me. I know that I'm really fortunate. I also know there's not much that separates me from kids who have it a lot harder. You see me, you probably don't think twice. You see a street kid hanging out in the U District or Westlake Center, you make a point to walk around them. But you know what? I've met some of these kids, and they're not different. They may seem scary, but they're just kids out on their own, scrambling to survive. You'd have a tough guy's facade too, if you were dealing with what they are. Look under the surface, and you find talents and dreams, just like mine, just like yours, and just like your kids. What they don't have is the same chance in life, the opportunities, and that's not right. That's why I wanted to be here today, to be pro-social, to ask for your help. I'd like to introduce someone in our community who is helping, Megan Gibbard. She's the project manager on the big community initiative to end youth homelessness. She works for King County. Here she is. Welcome, Megan Gibbard.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So you've just heard from Adriana talk about the teenage brain, the work of adolescence. Things like learning how to take risks, learning how to make good choices, how to delay gratification, and doing all of this work in the context of the all-important peer influence. And you've also heard that for your average young person who's navigating just a sea of terrible choices, and I know that all of you can think back to some of the magical choices that you made as teenagers, there's a few factors that can reduce the amount of risk that a young person chooses to take. Things like a positive family influence and getting enough sleep. These things can reduce the amount of risk a young person chooses to take. So what is the connection here to homeless young people? I've spent the last 10 years working with youth experiencing homelessness, and they're young people who I have been honored to know and sometimes have been lucky enough to help. And here is the spoiler equation about how it all connects. You all ready? Yeah, okay, you're with me, that's good. So take developmental teenage work, which is learning how to make choices, and which is a predisposition to risky behavior anyhow. Add the incredible harm of living on the streets, and conditions that would make one choose things that seem pretty normal if you don't have your basic needs met. Add needing friends to actually keep you safe. Subtract positive family influence. And what this equals is the potential for harm that far outlasts a young person's time on the streets. This is why we intervene. Here in King County, on any given night, there are 1,000 young people who are struggling with homelessness. These youth are homeless for 3 reasons. Home doesn't exist, home isn't safe, and home isn't supportive. Home doesn't exist for young people who age out of foster care at age 18 and have no place to go. Home isn't safe. Conflict at home is the #1 reason that young people end up on our streets. And home isn't supportive. For GLBTQ young people, home isn't safe for them, isn't accepting of them the moment that they tell their parents or their caregivers who they really are. A homeless youth doesn't choose the conflict that they face at home, and they don't choose the harm of the streets, and they certainly do not choose a predator that might approach them that first night when they're standing in Westlake Square and they don't know where they're going to spend the night. Think about that for a minute. Homeless youth are experiencing this developmental work, learning how to be an adult, learning how to make choices, in the context of tremendous harm they didn't choose on the streets. And this is why all of us need to intervene immediately. Homeless young people, all young people, are at the most dynamic time in their lives. And while the risks of the streets are tremendous, compounded by that teenage impulse, we can absolutely end the crisis of homelessness for young people if we intervene right away. And that's the good news. Here in King County, we have an initiative to do just that. It's new. I started at King County 8 months ago to help lead this work. And other people across the country are reaching out to us to see how it's done. And I'm not making this up. We are absolutely a national leader, which is very exciting. We're focusing on a couple of things. Prevention. So intervening right away when a young person is run away or has been kicked out. You may have heard the United Way share a national safe place, those yellow placards that you may have seen on libraries or on buses where youth can present themselves as needing help, and within 45 minutes a staff person shows up to get them to safety. We know that for a lot of young people, they can make it back home and into a caring situation, and that's great. We want to strengthen that. But we also know that there are young people for whom home will never be a safe option. So for these youth, when it isn't safe to return home, we're connecting them with housing and with services, so safe housing, education and employment, and support to make their own permanent connections out in the community. Underneath all of this, and this should make the business folks in the room very happy, we are obtaining better data to understand how many young people are homeless, what is most effective to address it, and if we're making any progress. United Way is a key leader in this initiative and is the voice of every single person in this room, saying that every youth in our community deserves a safe place to live and to thrive. But back to the young people themselves. So when talking to high school groups, which I do quite a bit, I often ask these teenagers to think about the stresses in their lives. So things like friends and schoolwork and pressures around sex and drugs. And then I ask these teenagers to think about what it would be like to deal with those stresses and to not be sure of where you were going to sleep from night to night. So if you didn't know after that last class if there was going to be food left over for you at the meal program that you had to eat dinner at. And I would ask these teenagers to think about what choices would start to seem pretty reasonable if you didn't have your basic needs met. So you have to, when you're on the streets, you have to have a peer group, even if they're a bad influence, because if you can't get into shelter, who's going to sleep with you under that bridge or in that park and help keep you safe? And accepting that drug dealer's offer of whatever it is might be the thing that keeps you alert and safe throughout the night. And an abusive boyfriend or girlfriend might be the only sense of family that you have. I think about how immediate intervention could have changed the path and the future for some of the kids that I was lucky enough to work with as a case manager. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this. If kids don't get the immediate intervention that they need, we lose them. I think about Steve. He left, probably the 9th or the 10th foster care placement when he was 12. And he didn't go to shelter because he didn't want them to call his foster care family, and he might have to go back there. So he would use meth for days. This is a 12-year-old, mind you. Would use meth for days. And he would come to see me, and he would be exhausted and sick. And I used to wonder if I would ever see him well rested, and if I ever see him well. I think about Cam, who left his mother's home because she couldn't afford him anymore. He received a small Social Security income for a disability. He had a pretty profound developmental delay. And then when he was on the streets, he just wanted the friend group that he didn't have when he was in high school. So he was the perfect target for people who would steal his income and would get him to do risky things for them. And I think about Jessie. She was kicked out of her home when she confronted her abusive stepdad, the moment that he stopped abusing her and instead turned to her younger sister. She'd known that she was a lesbian since she was really small and was probably her dad's step target for this reason. But she was dynamic and she was passionate. And when she was on the streets, she made a friend group very easily, and it was the norm in this group to use heroin, so she did too. And she, to this day, struggles with that addiction and with the consequences of that addiction. I have been honored to be in these kids' lives, Steve, Cam, and Jessie. And now I honestly feel very privileged to lead our community's work in ending youth homelessness. And the humility that I feel in this work is that I have always known that I could have been in those shoes had I just not been lucky to be born in the family that I was born into. When I was 16, I came out to my parents, and unlike the 40% of kids tonight that we serve who are kicked out of their home when they come out, my parents didn't. We fought a ton, and we struggled, but ultimately I went to college with their support. And the connection that I feel to my family and to my brother was really the bubble wrap that helped me weather my teenage years. My dad still calls me to this day to say, just get some sleep, Megan. Are you sleeping? Are you sleeping at all? And maybe he's read Adriana's research, I don't know. But this connection with my family was what helped me make it through. All of you know that we need to be that parent for homeless kids that are encouraging them to get some sleep. We need to be that family that seeds connections, permanent connections in the community, and not forever, but just until they don't need us any longer. You know, as an aside, I was sitting in my cubicle in King County, banging away on my computer like a little monkey, and I got a call from Steve. And I hadn't heard from him in a little while. He's doing well. He's up in Snohomish County, and he asked if I would be a job reference for him. He's applying for a job at Cocoon House up in Everett. And I haven't heard from him, so I don't know if he got the job, but they'd be really lucky to have him. It's hard to be a teenager. Think about what it was like for you when you were a teenager. Think about what you might be struggling with your other teenagers right now. It's even harder to be a homeless teenager. And it's our responsibility as a community, everybody in this room, to make sure that these kids make it through. Thank you.